So it's time to take a look at the last remaining Black Ops Battleship, the Redeemer, or as it's called in this game, the Armageddon Special Ops. Now why do I call it the Redeemer? Well, it's much easier to say the name. Much faster, and it does describe this ship pretty well, I would say. Now, at the moment in the game we have two of the Black Ops drone boats, the Dominix and the Armageddon. And I did say that the Dominix has probably more DPS than this ship, but this ship has some fantastic E-War. And this is kind of a cross between the Battlegorn and between the Armageddon. It's a very interesting ship, as we're about to find out. So let's take a look at the basic info. Now, the raw bonus on this ship is practically the same as the raw bonus on the previous Black Ops ships. It's universally the same. Although I would say that we might see some buffs that I spoke about in the past, and honestly these ships do need that velocity speed bonus that we don't have at the moment, but it should be hopefully added in the near future. Now as for the skills, the last ship that I looked at, the Scorpion, the Widow, did have some of the new skills within the trait description. Now this ship has just the expert skills, so it should be, let's say, easier and probably less expensive to skill into this ship, but you do get a minus 3% large laser activation time bonus, minus 10% large laser activation need, and plus 75% large laser tracking speed bonus on the expert large laser operation. Of course this is per level, so with each level it's going to be increased. Now expert large drone operation bonus will give plus 60% drone damage, plus 75% drone EHP, plus 6 kilometers drone commander. This ship is primarily a drone boat, but this is the first Armageddon that actually seems to utilize both lasers and drones. It also has the electronic warfare bonus, plus 4.5% bonus to neutralizer and Nosferatu effective range, and you also do get the expert Battleship command bonus, which will give you extra speed, a bit more inertia, and a bit less inertia and extra jump range. So far looks to be pretty solid, and the stats are kind of unique for this ship. Now it has 4 drones, 6 high slots, 4 medium slots, 6 low slots, 3 combat and 3 engineering rigs. This is probably the highest high slot count on any drone boat in the game at once. 6 high slots for a drone boat, that is actually kind of amazing. Now based on the shield and armor here, we see that the Redeemer is looking to be a perfect armor tank. But theoretically, we can also make this ship a shield tank, but you have a bit more armor, so I will definitely go with the armor tank on this Black Ops. And we also have the capacitors here. Surprisingly, I actually expected this ship to have the best capacitors, but turns out I was wrong. The Widow has the best capacitor out of all the Black Ops ships, and surprisingly this isn't the slowest Black Ops. The Widow is probably the slowest, but this thing is surprisingly fairly fast, and I would say might very well be the second fastest Black Ops in the game at the moment. So let's go on to the builds. Now, honestly, it does kind of feel weird to have 6 high slots, but the laser performance is not that bad. It's actually pretty solid. Has decent activation time, decent range, overall good accuracy of, and decent tracking speed. In the medium slots I have a Scrambler, Web, and a Nosferatu and Neutralizer, although on this ship I feel like the Neutralizers might be the better option, because the Nosferatu is not going to have the same overall penalty as the Battlegorn and other Blooderists, but the Neutralizer will definitely have extra range, and the Neutralizer will be very, very lethal against smaller to medium-sized ships, and it will be very lethal against battleships as well. Now, as for the drones, I have some offense ogres installed, but you also can utilize medium drones and small drones. I always recommend that you have a variety of drones in the drone bay, and of course variety of drones equipped. Always make sure that the whole beehive is always full, because you never know when you will need to replace drones. They can be destroyed. In some cases you might have to switch drones in order to catch a fast target. So with this ship you have a bonus on all drones, so you can use all the drones, from light, medium, and even heavy. You can also use sentries if you like. Although the Redeemer, the Armageddon here, is a bit of a active ship. It's not really designed to be stationary. It has some decent speed, so I'll definitely take advantage of the speed. And of course the DPS on the drones will go down or go up depending on what the drones you use. I personally started to use offense drones on all of my ships, and yeah, they're expensive, but their DPS is really good. The ogres will have the highest DPS, the berserkers, for example, will have the highest velocity. The predators will be good in most situations as well, good against shields. So every drone has basically its own purpose, and I like to use a mix of drones to mix all of them so I can counter yellow hardeners. It's a very interesting and good trick that is very effective against tanky ships that use yellow hardeners, or even ships that have yellow hardeners in general. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's only good against tanky targets, it's good against all targets. So, as for the low slots, I have 3 adaptives, a damage control, and dual plates. Now, these are the new titanium plates, I believe. Yeah, they are. Now, the titanium plates have been buffed recently. They actually give you extra resistance, passive resistance, but they reduce the thermal by 6.97%. So you increase EM, kinetic and explosive, but you reduce thermal by 6.97%, which honestly isn't that bad. And honestly, you have more positives, you have more benefits than drawbacks by using the plates. One of the drawbacks is, I guess, the reduced thermal resistance, and you also do get some, well, I guess, more weight on the ship, which makes it a bit slower, but the speed reduction is far less than the reduction that we see on the normal plates. Now, as for the tank, I went wild on this ship, and I basically focused. Now, this build kind of imagined to be a bait Sino build, Sino bait. Basically, you want to use something like this to bait capitals, carriers, and super capitals to drop Sino and to launch a bunch of ships on them, or even open the covered Sino order class. And it can fit both, but never both at the same time. I focused on resistance and armor volume, and it has 170,000 armor hit points. We are nearing some carrier level of armor here, and it has fantastic armor resistance as well, so that's pretty good. As for the nanocore, you can pick any nanocore that you already have. The old nanocores are compatible with this ship, so you don't have to worry about having to buy a new one. All the nanocores for the Armageddon hull will work really well on this thing. So whatever nanocore you have, it can be fitted. You can focus on armor, shield, well, not exactly shield, but you can focus on drone damage, armor, and I guess speed, or whatever stat you need from the core you can basically slap on this ship. Now, let's see how much hit points I have when I undock this thing. Honestly, the hit point value might be the highest that I've seen so far on a battleship. Although actually no, I think the navies still surpass by a lot more, but it's very interesting to see how tanky these monsters can get. They're very tanky despite not having the same stats as the navies. 86, 89, 91, 90%, 1.4 million hit points. This is without the damage control, by the way, so we're looking at a brick. And it's also a capacitor stable, which is good. Although capacitor stability is kind of the not really going to be that important with a passive tank, although with lasers might need the capacitor. Right? And 4.1 million hit points with the damage control act, 95, 96, 97, and 97. So you can use this thing to bait. It has the tank for it, and you can drop this thing on small fleets very easily and just open Sino and just release a bunch of BlackOPS ships, release a bunch of capitals. I mean, depends on what Sino you have equipped, I guess. And I did have the thermocirculation implant, which works really well for this ship. You can use this implant if you want more tank, of course. And I would say for a bait ship, the thermocirculation is definitely the way to go. It adds just a lot more resistance. So overall, a very heavily armored and a very beefy little boat. Now, that was one build. Let me go and... That was one implant, my apologies, that was one implant. Now, besides the thermocirculation, you can also use the bomber tactic and the new one, which I will be using. And speaking of the thermocirculation implant, you can add one damage control unit. I actually forgot to add that. This will improve the resistance even more, by a total of about 2%. And I'm using the passive damage control unit, because that one is... so far, from what I've seen, very good, and you almost have 700,000 hit points. Did increase the passive a little bit, and now it gives 10% bonus, 10% resistance on all damage types, on shield, armor, and hull. So overall, have to say, this ship kind of surprised me. Didn't really expect the Redmer to be that interesting, but now this ship has my attention, not gonna lie. This thing has the tank, that's for sure. Alright, let's take a look at the active stats. Now 1.43 million. There is a little increase, a very little increase, although noticeable. 87, 90, 90, 90%. Activation time is going to be reduced to 9.1 seconds, but honestly it's more than enough time that you will need to open the sign-on and to tank, basically. I actually think that this might be the the tankiest Black Ops that I've tested out so far, based on the numbers at least. I know the Widow can be very tanky, but the Widow has only 5 low slots. The Dominix can also be tanky, but it didn't really feel like tank is all about... it didn't really feel like, you know, the tank is the main thing for the Domi. The Domi has DPS. I think this thing is all about the tank, but it also has some decent E-war, so overall we're looking at a very interesting ship. And with the damage relative 6.9, almost 7 million hit points on a Battleship. I mean, I'm surprised because the Black Ops ships don't have the same resistance as navies, and we are nearing navy tank over here. That's impressive, even if it's not for too long. I mean, the navy damage lasts like 30 seconds, so the navy is still going to have more tank, that's for sure, there is no denying. But for a bait ship, this is going to do a pretty good job, honestly. I'm pretty happy with the build. Pretty happy with the tank in general on the ship. It's impressive what these ships can do. And of course, they can only be better. They only just need a bit of improvement. Honestly, just a tiny bit of improvement, and they would be, I would say, in a very nice place. So, of course, I was talking about a Sino bait without the actual Sino installed. So the only thing that you have to do here is basically swap one of the modules. For a Sino, you can also swap the Nosferatu and Neutralizer for Scramblers as well if you want to hold the target. But if you're trying to drop some ships on a gate camp, then something like this is going to be more than enough. You also want to have the E-war capability utilized. I would actually say that this ship might need one extra medium slot, just so it can fit 1 or 2 more Nosferatus and Neutralizers, but you know, in the vast majority of cases the ship is probably not going to be running any Scramblers, but only the E-war, because that's how the Armageddon has been used so far from what I've seen. And of course, you need to sacrifice one of the low slot modules. I'll sacrifice one adaptive for a clocking device, but after all, this is the Black Ops, and you can use the ship in a sneaky way, that's for sure. You can use the ship to camp in someone's mission, or to camp a gate, or you know, it has its use, definitely. So it can fit a clocking device, and it can keep the plates, although mobility is going to be limited without any propulsion module. But there are situations where you don't need to have a propulsion module, where let's say you're waiting for someone to warp to a mission, or you're waiting for a carrier to go back in a site. You warp and cloak and just wait for them to land, and then when they land on you, you just decloak and you tackle them. There's a million situations where a build like this can be utilized. Although I'm personally not a fan of having no propulsion module, since it's a battleship after all, and at the moment it doesn't have any speed bonus. So maybe when the Black Ops get a speed bonus while being cloaked, maybe then the no propulsion build would start to be one of my favorites. But at the moment, I don't really feel comfortable flying a battleship, especially something like this, without a Athber or a micro overdrive. And it still has some good tank as well. I'm actually very happy with the tank. That's nice. 5.8 million and 97, 97, 98, 98. Pretty good. No complaints about the tank. The only complaints I'll have with any Black Ops is the lack of speed while being cloaked. That's the only thing, basically, that I can... The one and only thing that I think the largest issue, right? Well, I say issue, not really problem, but it lacks speed in order to fulfill the role to the fullest. It can still do the Black Ops stuff, but the speed while being cloaked is definitely the only thing I would say, the one crucial thing that is lacking, and I think developers are well aware of that, and we can expect to see the extra speed bonus very soon. And speaking of speed, you can sacrifice one plate to add one micro overdrive, although you can sacrifice basically any other module that you like, depending on, again, depends on the purpose that you want to give the ship. But I can sacrifice one plate, I can maintain, still has a lot of armor, that's for sure, and still has some good resistance, so seems to be usable, although a lot less, well, I say a lot less, it still has over 140,000 in armor, so can't really say that it has no armor. It has a lot of armor, but with one less plate, the armor will definitely be a bit lower than with two plates, which, you know, is to be expected since you remove one armor plate that gives armor. Anyway, let's orbit, let's use the micro orbit. Let's take a look at the tank as well. Now, almost 1,000,000 hit points. I'm still very happy with the tank. It still has almost 1,000,000 hit points, while sacrificing 2 tank modules for cloak and for propulsion. Yeah, that's pretty nice. That looks pretty good. 83, 88, 88, and 87. And here, 1.2 km per second. Not that slow. It's definitely not as fast as the Panther, not fast as the Typhoon, but it's faster than the previous 2 battleships that I've tried. So this is the second fastest in Black Ops at the moment in the game. Kind of surprised because I did not expect this thing to be fast. And of course, let's check out the speed while cloaked. It can fly through inertia for a while, but as you can see, it is drastically slowing down. 48 meter per second speed. Yikes! Yeah, this needs to be at least like 500 meter per second, and I think it will be fine. If it had that if it had that speed, this 500 meter per second, I think that's like the lowest acceptable speed on a Black Ops. But of course, could be faster. I wouldn't be complaining. And of course, it can lock immediately after the cloaking, which is a trait of Black Ops battleships, and this thing can do that just fine. 4.8 million hit points, 96, 98, 98, and 97 still has the trunk, so sacrificing 2 modules didn't really impact, I mean, it did impact the tank a lot, but it still has a lot of hit points for a battleship, so no complaints about the tank. Flawless stats so far. So let's do some more. Let's do some more builds. As I've mentioned, I'll be using the ship only as an armor tank because it has a lot of armor, so it would be a waste not to take advantage of it. So armor tank is definitely the way to go from what I'm seeing here. Now, let me see what else can I do here. As for the rigs, I think it's time to go and do a DPS build. So for a DPS build, you can easily do that. This thing will not have as much DPS as the Dominix, but it is basically a... Well, if we look at the Balgorn and if you look at the Armageddon, if you see a Balgorn mating with the Armageddon, you basically get this ship as the product. So yeah, it's kind of a hilarious comparison, but that's basically how the Redmer feels. It feels like a ship that's being made from the Balgorn and from the Armageddon. A fusion between these 2 ships, if you like. But the primary weapon system on this thing are drones, surprisingly, because this thing has 6 high slots. So this is again the only drone boat with, I believe, 6 high slots. I don't remember any other drone boat that has this many high slots, but it might look like you should go with laser rigs, but drones are your primary source of DPS on this ship. And of course the tank will be lower, but it still has surprisingly a lot of armor, so that's a good thing to know. And for my classic PvP setup, triple scrummers, a web, or triple scrummers and a sino, depending on what you're doing. Actually, triple scrummers and a sino is a very interesting low sec and null sec hunting build. Basically, you can have one Black Ops running around tackling, and the same Black Ops can also drop Sino to open the Sino for all the Black Ops ships to crawl out, and of course capitals and stuff like that. So they definitely have a very nice purpose. Speaking of the low slot modules, I'll be doing the classic. Now, this is one of the moments where you can technically go with a shield passive tank, although I will still prefer a armor tank. But if you have a shield generator, you can just slap the shield generator. It has a bonus on that as well, so you will get a beefy bonus from from the generator. It does give a lot of shield. Although armor, I would say it's still better. You'll have a lot more armor than shield, so I would still stick with armor, but with shield you get less. You get less, I guess, weight in the ship is maybe faster. I don't know. Now, speaking of the other 3 available slots, I'll be using dual Nestor drone damage amplifiers to improve the DPS of the drones, and I'll be using one drone speed mod because there are going to be situations where you want to engage a smaller target, or maybe there's an interceptor tackling you, or there's a ship that's fast for your drones, so you want to have at least one of these modules to enhance the velocity of the drones so that they can catch fast moving targets. And this is why I say that you should always have a bunch of small drones, mini drones. You never know when you need them, and you never know when you have to have something fast to catch something, so 2 drone damage amplifiers and 1 drone speed mods are ideal. Now you can sacrifice the extender and basically have 3 drone amplifiers and 1 supervision drone speed mod, but you will sacrifice tank, and I prefer to have a bit of tank and a bit of DPS, and in this case a bit of drone speed. So overall we're looking at, you know, a balanced build, and it has some decent DPS. Now with a DPS build, when you want DPS, then you will be switching to the bomber tactic implant, or you will be switching to the aerospace tactic implant. I'll be showing you both. Now the drone bombs have that crazy alpha damage. They just wipe most ships out in seconds. If you have a very good build, then the drone bombs will definitely be the better choice for PvP, the better choice maybe for low stake hunt, and when you have a fleet, if you have a bunch of drone bomb DPS ships, they'll just wipe out the target in seconds, although they're not really, you know, they're the most overpowered implant in the game, but a good tank will still be able to hold out. So while it has its good, it also has its bad in drawbacks. So it has the alpha burst, but if you don't kill the target within the burst duration, you might be in trouble. Basically, that's how the implant works. And 3,200 DPS, not bad. Let's unlock and let me show the active stats of this ship. Now 300% bonus, which will land this ship at maybe about 9,000 to 12,000 DPS, depending on what drones you're using. So that's pretty good, pretty solid DPS. Honestly, 12,000 alpha damage, pretty good. Actually, it's close to the Dominic's, which can have about 15 to 17,000 DPS with the same setup, with the same drones, with the same build, but the Dominic's has a bit more DPS, so it will be doing a bit more overall total DPS in the end. And we're looking at 3.7 with 1 amplifier, and with the second amplifier engaged 4.2. Yeah, it lands about 12,000 DPS with the bombs active. Pretty good. Should be pretty devastating towards most low sec ships, and maybe even unsuspecting null sec ships, especially if you're on a fleet. And 1.5 km per second is the max warp speed, which honestly is pretty fast now, for a battleship of course. 850,000 hit points. Yeah, as you can see, it still has more armor than shield, so that's funny, but that's how it looks with the shield extended act. One of the reasons why I still prefer armor plate. With the armor plate, it would have like over 100,000 armor, so armor plate definitely feels like it's the way to go. Now, what else can I do? Yeah, I'll slap an armor plate because that's just how I like to fly the ship. Armor plate, yeah. I mean, you can use both. Honestly, you can use the armor plate or the boost or the extended, but never ever use both at the same time. That's cursed. Never mix tanks. Just focus on one and stick with one tank. Never fuse two. Never hybrid tank. Hybrid tanking a BlackOPS is cursed, very cursed. So yeah, and I think it will have. Well, it looks like it will have a lot more hit points now. And of course, you can place a Sino as I mentioned before. So yeah, it has a lot of different purposes, and there's like a million different builds out there that you can use. And of course, you can put the Nosferatu and the neutralizer, but for that you have to sacrifice one Scrander and that one web. If the ship had a 5th medium slot, it would probably be perfect, but I guess for balancing purposes, it has 4 medium slots, so that's fine. It still can do a lot of things. Don't really mind the 4 medium slots, but would be fun if it had 5, like a Balgorn. That would be hilarious. At least it has like an extra low slot. That's doing better than the Balgorn. Balgorn has 5 low slots, and the lack of that one low slot on the Balgorn is kind of the weakest part about it. And as I mentioned before, you can also use the aerospace tactic implant. This implant has some advantages over the bomber tactic. It has phenomenal sustained DPS, and its DPS is 100% passive, so you don't have to activate the implant in order to get the DPS. It gives you passive DPS boost, which is pretty good for longer fights, fantastic for PvE, and in most cases, I would say if you have the chance to pick between the bomber tactic and the aerospace tactic, I would probably go with the aerospace tactic because of the sustained DPS. 4044.1, that's already pretty good. But the bombard has that fantastic alpha damage, and short burst is not going to be effective for long. Basically, it relies on your target having a bad build in most cases, I would say. And again, it's good for a fleet, but for tankier ships, sustained DPS is definitely much better, because with sustained DPS you will be applying a lot more DPS in the longer run. 4.7 thousand DPS with one, and with the second one we're looking at 5.4 thousand DPS. Pretty good, pretty decent. A bit lower than the Dominus had with the same will have with the same build, but it's still doing a pretty decent job. No complaints from me about the DPS coming from this ship. I mean, this ship kind of fulfills 2 different purposes. Evor, Sino, it can also be DPS, I guess. So for a multi-purpose ship, it sure does do all of these jobs really well. So no complaints from me on that aspect. And that leaves us to the PvE builds. Now, these ships are not really meant to be used for PvE, although I'm not saying that you can't. You can use any ship for PvE if you like. No one is going to prevent you from flying the ship the way you want to fly. Of course, there are some things that you have to keep in mind. You have to have a good build, of course. You can fit the ship however you like as well, but can't really be blaming the ship if the fit sucks, right? So you have to make sure that you follow the skill requirements for the ship, the stats, the bonuses, and you can use the ship for PvP, PvE, that's open. You can use the ship for whatever you like, basically. So I'll be using the classic PvE build that I usually do. A bunch of damage mods, in this case drone damage and fires, and since this is a armor tank, I'll be using a armor repairer and an adaptive armor hardener, but you can also do a shield tank if you like, although the shield tank will eat a bit more capacitor than the armor repair, and this ship doesn't have the highest capacitor volume, so you want to keep that in mind. So I would still say the armor tank is the way to go, but if you want to use the ship as a shield tank for PvE, you're free to do so. Not going to argue about that, because it can do both. It has a bonus on shield extender, so might as well pull off a shield tank for PvE at least. I mean, in PvE you don't really need a lot of tank, honestly, at least for high sec PvE. For low sec and for null, I'll be using something different when it comes to the build. Something like a PvP build for low sec and for null sec is the best, but for high sec everything is all about that DPS, so you can just go wild on the DPS of the ship. And one armor hardener added, so let me just find a armor repairer. And this is how it would look like in the low slots, just pure DPS and just a bit of armor repair action here. And for the medium slots, dual webs and a Nosferatu and a Scrambler, basically the ideal for an armor tank. If you're using a shield tank, maybe dual Nosferatus, because the shield booster will eat a bit more capacitor, and you want to have the stable capacitor, then probably you want to have dual Nosferatus to keep the capacitor running with the shield boost. And we have some decent DPS output. This is with the aerospace tactic implant, and I expect to see a lot more DPS, at least 7000 DPS, which would definitely be close to Dominic's, although the Dominic's will still have a bit more. I mean, the Dominic's is just scary. The Dominic's Black Ops is scary, that's for sure, but this thing is scary in its own way as well. So, let's take a look at the active stat. The tank, well, the tank is okay, I guess. Average Battleship. Overall EHP, I mean, not much tank going on here, but it will get the job done without a problem. It's fairly tanky for high sec, so it's, again, not going to be posing any problems. And for the DPS, 5.2 thousand with one, 5.9 thousand with two amplifiers active. With the third one, we're looking at 6.5 thousand DPS. With the end with the last one, 6.8 thousand DPS. You know, pretty good. Pretty happy with the overall results. It's close to 7,000 DPS, so I'm fairly happy with the DPS number on this ship. So let's take this little boat for a ride and let's see how it feels in combat. Now again, the thing about this ship that feels so different from the other drone boats is the fact that it has 6 high. I mentioned that like 50 times by now, but the 6 high slots are, I don't know. Maybe, you know, if I had to change the ship, if I had the chance to change the ship, I would take that one high slot and I would put it in the medium slot, because I feel like the extra medium slot, the 50 medium slot, would definitely be more useful than the extra high slot. After all, this ship does do more damage with drones than turrets, so might as well take one high slot and put it in the medium slots, and then it could have one extra NOS, one extra neutralizer, and one extra weapon. I mean, depending on what you want to do with the ship, it can fit both. So like, that's why the extra high slot feels like it wasn't really necessary, at least on this ship. But I don't know, maybe I'm missing something, although I'm very sure I'm not missing anything. But it doesn't get any damage bonus on the lasers, so you might as well have 5 lasers instead of 6 and having 5 medium slots instead of 4. I feel like it would just be more beneficial, but maybe that's just me. Although the lasers sure do slap. I mean, it's nice to have 6 lasers on a drone boat. It's definitely very unique. Definitely very unique. Reminds you on the rattlesnake a bit, because the rattlesnake also has a bunch of high slots, but the rattlesnake also has a bonus on missiles. Although the bonus on missiles on the rattlesnake is nowhere near as the bonus it has on drones. Still can't get over the fact that we had that there are actually rattlesnake builds showing a build that has missile launch rigs. That's so cursed. That's so cursed. It's literally a wasted rig slot, because you will be getting so much more DPS out of the ship with drone rigs. But hey, easy kills for me, I guess. I'm not really complaining about that. But I have to say, the lasers sure do slap. The drones also slap. I mean, it has a lot of drone DPS, so not really surprised that it does delete these ships very, very quickly. So, with this ship being used now, you might be wondering, well, which one of these ships would I say it's the best? And that's the thing. I don't think that there's like the best. Every Black Ops here has its own thing. They all have fantastic passive shield tank. I mean, they all have the potential to be very good passive shield tanks. Not as good as the navies, because the navies have a lot more chunk to them, but they have a very good recharge, and I'm definitely looking forward to see more passive tank being added. I mean, it is obvious that with the recent ships added, the focus has been a lot more on the passive tanking aspect. I like that. I say that passive tanking is definitely very fun, and it is a valid option. At least with the new ships, passive tanking is kind of a valid option, because the recharge is pretty good. It's pretty good, but could also be better. So if you have one of these ships, then passive tanking is definitely the way to, especially when we consider the fact that these things have so much bonus on plates and extenders. It is just a waste not to use them with a passive tank in mind, and their overall build, the way how they're meant to be used, is mostly PvP. Although, as I mentioned before and as I'm showing here now, you can also use the same ships for PvE as well. It works. It works really well. Now, what's up with my frame rate, you might be wondering? I have no idea. Ever since the last update, the tablet has been having some, let's say, has had some small frame rate problems occasionally. My phone has no issues, but the tablet has issues. I'm not really sure why that's the case, but the frame rate has been a bit lower lately, and my apologies for that. But it does run in a very high resolution, so I'm not going to complain about the frame rate, because if you see with what frame rate, with what resolution I'm playing, you wouldn't be surprised by the lag. Anyway, the large drones are doing really well, even against the smaller targets. Now, the thing with large drones is the fact that they're slow, they're big, they're slow, and they're not really that good for chasing out smaller targets. Of course, with the E-plant and with the drone navigation computers, you can kind of make large drones chase down fast ships, but smaller drones, medium and light drones, are definitely I would say much better to be used against the smaller ships, and safer as well, because the large ones might take a minute or two to actually reach the target. So always a very smart idea to have all of the drones at your disposal. As for what type of drones you should use, well, I just leave that up to the player. I mean, as I mentioned before, I'm using the new drones, the offense drones, assault drones. They're really good. Assault drones are fast. Offense drones have a lot more. They have a lot more DPS, but shorter range and less hit points. But they sure do a lot of DPS, and that's one of the reasons why I'm primarily using them. I use the offense drones on my Stratios. I think I have a bunch of them for some of my other drone boats. I have to actually check that, but I have a bunch of them. I build them. I got the blueprints from Null Space, and I just built the drone from the blueprints, and basically that's how I get the free drone. I say free drone, I mean free. All the resources, all the materials, everything has been received from the wrecks of players from PvP. So I have a lot of materials to play around with, and honestly, the PvP aspect of the game has been really, really good. And of course, there are some balancing concerns, primarily with the drone bombs, if you ask me. But in the end, I don't think it was really that much of a problem now. Kind of is a problem, but I don't really mind it that much. Although I'll never change my opinion on the nerf. It needs to be nerfed. A lot of things need to be nerfed. But we will see what will happen down the road. I mean, so far the ships that we have received were pretty good, pretty solid. Maybe, and this is something that one of the developers spoke about a couple days ago, or a week ago, I think. They may be reducing the insurance cost of these ships. And if that happens, so I'll be happy. I think a lot of players will be very happy if the insurance cost on these ships were to go down. And then the one thing that has to go down afterwards were the boxes. The ship boxes need to go, honestly. But I don't really know if that's going to happen that soon, but we will see. One good thing that I've heard is definitely the insurance cost reduction. I mean, these ships cost like carriers right now in IP. 24 billion for a whole, around that number. For the navies, it's also roughly around the same, 15 billion for the navies, which is, you know, a pretty high price. So that's one good thing, is the good possibility of insurance costs being reduced. And when the insurance cost is reduced, you can expect that these ships will be used a lot more in combat. And losing these ships will be maybe more affordable, maybe less painful. I know a lot of players are kind of scared from flying these things because they're so expensive. I mean, I have like 2 navies. I tried to sell them, no one wants to buy that, but they have like 8 billion of integrations put into each one of them. So yeah, we are looking at some very expensive boats, that's for sure. But yeah, if someone is interested in the navies that I have for selling, well, feel free to contact me on Discord, I guess. I mean, these things are bricks, the tankiest navies in the game, so I think they're worth to buy. They have some very good rigs, so if you need a floating brick, well, you know where to go. And since this is the last way, let me prepare the autopilot to return back to base. Now, what do I think about this ship? Well, it's good. It surprised me. I actually thought that the Redimer might be the most boring one. I thought that it's not going to be, you know, I really thought that it's just going to be another Armageddon, but it has the tank. It is definitely a very interesting ship, and it's so surprising how such a small thing made this ship so fun to test out. There are some things that feel very interesting about some certain ships, and I guess this is one such ship. Maybe, just maybe, I might go back to lasers. I mean, I have skilled out of large lasers a very long time ago, but maybe if the insurance, and when the insurance price goes down and when the market price is actually more reasonable, I may buy one of these ships and use it, because I find this concept very interesting, and I can definitely make this ship work really well. So that was the Redimer, or that was the Armageddon Special Ops. A very interesting and a very unique ship that I honestly had a lot of fun flying throughout this test. So with that being said, hope you guys enjoyed. If you would like to support me, feel free to like and subscribe. And with that being said, stay safe, and as always, I'll see you next time.